In 1903, Milton Hershey founded the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania, looking to build a chocolate paradise. 3 years later, Hershey Park opened to the public. They started adding rides in 1908, and their first coaster opened in 1923, the original Wildcat. The park has seen 20 coasters come and go, and 14 remain. This collection is considered among the best and most diverse in the world, and today I'm gonna rack them up and count them down. These are the coasters of Hershey Park, from worst to best. Sometimes I rank every coaster in the park's history, but I won't be doing that in this case. I made my first trip to Hershey Park in 2018 and I've been back twice, so the only coaster I rode that's gone is the new Wildcat, built by GCI and operating between 1996 and 2022. Because I rode that, I'll rank it up at the end of this video. They also had a BA Schiff kids coaster called Mini Comet. That operated from 1974 to 1978, a pair of Chance Wright's toboggans right next to each other. Those were open from 1972 to 1977. Their original Wildcat was built by PTC and was a mid-sized wooden coaster, closing down in 1945. More recently, Roller Soaker was their set point water coaster, opening in 2002 and staying around for a full decade, being removed at the end of the 2012 season. They didn't exactly take out their best coasters, so let's run down the coasters that are still there that make this park world famous. Number 14, Coco Cruiser, a Zamperla gravity coaster, opened in 2014. After Mini Comet closed in 1978, Hershey Park didn't have a true kids coaster. 36 years later, Zamperla came in and installed their gravity coaster, one of dozens around the world. It rises up a lift chain, drops to the right, rises up into a helix, goes around 360 degrees, and makes a right turn back to the station. This is the one coaster at the park I haven't ridden yet, but I've ridden plenty of its clones. It does nothing for thrill seekers, but like I said, after 36 years of not having a true kids coaster, this fills a big gap in their lineup. Number 13, Wild Mouse, a Mack Rides Wild Mouse, opened in 1999. Like most parks around the turn of the century, Hershey Park was adding coasters on a yearly basis. They weren't always big or original. This is a very standard Mack Wild Mouse, a compact mobile version, 46 feet tall, 28 miles an hour, about 1,200 feet of track. It's the same one they just ripped out of Busch Gardens, Tampa. It's defined by quick hairpin turns and sharp hills. I'd call them airtime hills, but there's no airtime. That being said, my last ride came this past summer and it was very fast paced. The trim brakes weren't doing much and it was a lot of fun. Number 12, Trailblazer, an Aero Mine Train, opened in 1974. The oldest steel coaster in the park. This was part of the mine train craze of the 70s. A lot of parks got their start in the 70s and used this as their first coaster. But even though Hershey Park had been established for 7 decades, they still jumped at the chance to get themselves an Aero Mine Train. Some of these were built for their terrain. This one has some terrain elements, especially after the first drop, staying close to the ground, and then it falls into a double helix, twisting around and back to the station. It's kind of a short ride, it doesn't have a great setting. It doesn't really have a moment where the ride gets crazy. It's just a family mine train and not one of my favorites. Number 11, Super Duper Looper, a Schwarzkopf Looper, opened in 1977. One of the very early looping coasters. This is often called the Revolution of the East. Magic Mountain's Revolution opened the year prior in 1976, the first coaster with a vertical loop, and by 1977 there are a bunch of them out there. This one stands out for also being a Schwarzkopf, for having a complete circuit and a long ride time, and it serves as a lot of people's first looping coaster. Like Revolution, it's also not very intense. Unlike Revolution, its loop is right after the first drop, going down 75 feet and flying into this 57-foot loop, darting around the hillside, going by Great Bear, Comet, and Skyrush, even going back through its loop, covering 2,600 feet of track. It's a perfect coaster for a kid to try their first inversion. As a thrill seeker, it leaves a lot to be desired, and I leave it outside the top 10. Number 10, Jolly Rancher Remix, a Vekoma Boomerang, opened in 1991. This opened as Sidewinder, and it was your standard boomerang. 116 feet tall, 935 feet of track, 3 inversions, forward and backward, a cobra roll and a loop, and for about 15 years between the mid-80s and 2000, these were popping up everywhere. In 2011, this got an upgrade, receiving a new train that has vest restraints, eliminating any possible headbanging. This is how I rode it, and I thought it was one of the more enjoyable boomerangs. Then, in 2022, it got a complete overhaul. It got an appropriate candy theme, Jolly Rancher Remix, adding lights and music in the station, also a tunnel after the loop. This time, it also got another upgraded train from Vekoma. I missed out riding this in 2023, but aside from the glitz and glamour, I imagine the ride experience isn't much different from before. It may be a top shelf boomerang, but it's still a boomerang. Number 9. Laugh Track, a Maurer spinner, opened in 2015. Speaking of clones, this is a very standard Maurer spinner. The same one as Undertow at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, Spider at Lagoon, Steel Dragon at Waldemere, and Phoenix at Adventureland. I feel I have to point this out because you can't see the laugh track. It was built in a giant box, weaving around neon funhouse theming in the darkness. All this adds a lot to the ride. It's glossy smooth, it has good forces. It's a nice twist on your typical Maurer spinner. This has absolutely miserable capacity, so watch out for that. But at least it gives a good ride. Number 8. Lightning Racer, a GCI racing wooden coaster, opened in 2000. This marked the 3rd year in a row getting a new coaster. And really, they got 2 for the price of 1. Lightning Racer has 2 sides. One's called Lightning, the other is called Thunder. They're listed with identical stats. A 90-foot drop to start, 3,400 feet of track, riding alongside each other at first, and then splitting off to do some crossovers later in the ride. In the end, they ride side by side as they hit the finish line. Some people love this, but I've never been a fan. This has a very cool layout, but even though I appreciate the smoothness, I find it pretty forceless. This was built before the water park was put in back in 2007, so now it's tucked behind the water park and separated from the rest of the park. I've never seen it with a line. This may be one of my more controversial opinions, but Lightning Racer could have been a lot better than it is. Number 7. Comet, a PTC wooden coaster, opened in 1946. This was the park's 2nd coaster, opening the year the original Wildcat was closed down. It has the very rare T-shaped layout, opening with a 78-foot drop, playing high off the ground to start. Then it makes a right-hand turn and goes into small hills out and back, in the end covering 3,360 feet of track. I was very impressed the first time I rode it. I got a full train on a hot day and the airtime was great, the trains having nothing but a buzz bar. Over my last 2 trips, it seems to have lost some power, and as of 2024, it's losing the buzz bars and getting the ratcheting lap bar. That's gonna hurt the ride even more, but it's still a quality ride, especially for one that's almost 80 years old. Number 6. Skyrush, an Intamin Hyper, opened in 2012. One of the most polarizing coasters in the world. I'm sure at least half of you watching put this at number 1. This is all about intensity and ejector airtime. A cable lift hill rocketing the train up 200 feet, dropping at 85 degrees, twisting to the right, and going to a layout full of airtime hills and sweeping turns, covering 3,600 feet. The elephant in the room here is the lap bars. Skyrush has very weird 4-across wing seating trains, having lap bars that come down over the rider's head and it shows no mercy. It comes down and digs into your lap, and the first time I went to the park, I hated them with a seething passion. Over my last 2 trips, I've learned to tolerate them, though they do kill all the great airtime the ride has to offer. I've come to realize the ride has a lot of filler track, something it really can't afford given it's not that long, and if you sit in the wing seats in the back, you're gonna get shaken up. I'll end by saying some nice things. The first drop in the back is awesome, so is that first airtime hill, but after that, you get a lot stapled. I also really like the last switchback hill, giving some good laterals with those negatives. That's why it's up here at number 6, but with Hershey Park's deep lineup, it can't crack the top 5. Number 5. Fahrenheit, an Intamin Looper, opened in 2008. Of all the Intamin coasters in the world, there aren't too many like this one. Intamin hasn't made many traditional looping coasters, let alone one that has a vertical lift and a beyond vertical drop. This one being the steepest in the world when it opened at 97 degrees, falling 121 feet, covering 2,700 feet of track and going into 6 inversions. This is not a blitz coaster, but it rides like one. It's very fast paced, going into big inversions to start, and ending with 2 corkscrews and a sharp airtime hill that tosses you out of your seat. A very impressive feat considering those bulky restraints. It runs a bit rough, but as of 2023, it's not that bad. This is a great ride, and one you're not going to find anywhere else. Number 4. Great Bear, a B&M invert, opened in 1998. This was the park's first B&M, and they crammed this into a small space in the hollow section of the park. Because of the weird dimensions, this starts with a helix after the lift hill, lining up that 124-foot first drop on a thin piece of land, right between the footpath and the creek. This goes into a loop, Immelman and 0G roll, diving into the creek and ending with a final corkscrew. This part famous for its very creative support structure, and it winds its way back up to the station. It only has 4 inversions, it only has 2,800 feet of track, but if you like a weird ride, this is it. Also, it was much more intense than I remember when I rode it in 2023. so that's an added bonus. Number 3. Storm Runner, an Intamin accelerator, opened in 2004. After Accelerator paved the way in 2002, and Top Thrill Dragster broke every major record in 2003, Hershey Park had to get their hands on their very own Intamin accelerator, using that powerful hydraulic launch. This is one of the fastest launches in the world, 0 to 72 in 2 seconds, and unlike the others, this has a dynamic layout. It rises into a 180-foot top hat, drops down into a cobra loop, and then the one-of-a-kind flying snake dive, a heartline roll into another twisting dive to the ground. It then winds its way back to the station, so it's not a very long ride at 2,600 feet, but it's chock full of great elements. The only downside is the restraints, the same ones used on Fahrenheit, and these do suppress the forces, but it could be worse. At least, they replaced the hard plastic ones with soft straps. Number 2. Candemonium, a B&M Hyper, opened in 2020. It's unusual for a park to have 2 hypers, but with the nature of Skyrush, Candemonium couldn't have been more different. Skyrush is violent, Candemonium is graceful. This was part of the new Chocolate Town section of the park, the first thing you see when you enter Hershey Park. This is themed to all things candy. The track, Chocolate Brown. The trains, themed to Hershey's Kisses, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and Twizzlers. The queue and station, basically one giant candy bar. This rises up 210 feet, dropping into a course that covers over 4,600 feet. That makes it one of the shorter B&M Hypers, and its finale around the Kisses fountain looks pretty, but isn't that exciting. This actually isn't one of my favorite B&M Hypers, but you really can't go wrong with a B&M Hyper. It has fantastic airtime, and the highlight of the ride is the first camelback. In the back row, you get a full 5 seconds of air. Number 1. Wildcat's Revenge, an RMC hybrid, opened in 2023. For years, the one thing Hershey Park was missing was an elite top shelf coaster. For as deep as the park's lineup is, unless you were a big Skyrush fan, there were a lot of coasters that landed in my top 100 but not my top 50. Candemonium came close, but wasn't quite there. Wildcat's Revenge definitely got the job done. Everyone knew an RMC would fit perfectly in the park, and this was a rare moment where the park did exactly what enthusiasts wanted. They converted the 1996 GCI Wildcat into a hybrid, adding 34 feet to the height, packing it with strong airtime and 4 inversions. It covers just over 3,500 feet of track, and the first half is elite. It has an 82-degree drop at 140 feet, a step-up underflip, a sharp airtime hill, a stall, but I think the second half is just average. This knocks it down to a middle-of-the-pack RMC, but it's still a top 25 coaster in my books, and without a doubt, the best coaster at Hershey Park. How about the coaster it replaced? I got a couple rides on Wildcat, the original coaster from GCI, and it left a lot to be desired. It had a good custom layout, 106 feet tall and almost 3,200 feet long, but it ran rough and it lacked any force. It wasn't a classic, it wasn't good. The only sentimental value it had was being GCI's first project, so it was a great candidate to be RMC'd. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't a fan either. If I was gonna plug this into Hershey Park's lineup, I'd rank it number 11, right behind Sidewinder, but right ahead of Super Duper Looper. That's a wrap on Hershey Park. Let me know what you think of my ranking, what you would change around, and if you have any experience on the defunct coasters of Hershey Park, tell me what you thought of them in the comments below. Before you go, don't forget to drop a like, and if you're new here and want to see more content like this, please give me a sub. I have a playlist with other park rankings. Also, check out my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you also happen to love baseball. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.